the definition I make of creativity is bringing new ideas to the mind. Innovation is bringing new ideas to the world. But without creativity, there is no innovation. So creativity is really the engine of innovation. And I think great meeting and event planners, they understand that. And I think that's where you're seeing a lot more actually creativity come back in to events now as well.
Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Keynote Curators Podcast. I'm Seth Deckman, your Keynote Curator. And our guest today is James Tailor. James, welcome to the podcast.
It is my great pleasure to be with you today, Seth. Looking forward to our conversation.
James, you talk about AI and imagination, but I really want to talk to you about creativity. So let's just jump right into it. You've managed Grammy winners. You've had this extensive career really spanning the globe. How do you see that people who are successful access, utilize, leverage creativity in their life, in their work? And how is that really the differentiator?
I think creativity is a way of living. If I was to ask your listeners just now, what percentage of you consider yourselves to be creative? In the US, it's going to be about 50%. If you have listeners here in like South Korea or Japan, it's going to be as low as 10%. So it's different. But what I would say is I genuinely believe that everyone is born with almost unlimited creative potential. It's what you do over the course of your life with it that's actually important. And creativity is actually becoming even more important now because of artificial intelligence, because a lot of AI will take away some of the non-creative tasks that we currently do in our jobs. So if you look at like the World Economic Forum, they interviewed 1,000 global business leaders recently, and they said for them, creativity is the skill that will be increasing most in importance. If you look at LinkedIn, the number one soft skill that employers are looking for today is creativity. So creativity, I think we're all born with it, but for many of us, we feel like it's left us, or it's maybe something, or we assume that creativity is purely with the arts or music or something like that. But I primarily talk about creativity as it relates to business.
I recall a conversation I had where I had heard that the band Aerosmith, and I'm paraphrasing here, they had something called like no sucky ideas on Monday or something like that. And everybody came in, whether it was truly a Monday or not, and they had like these just swing out these crazy ideas. And a couple of songs came, Love in the Elevator, a couple of songs came from that. And, I'm interested, Korea, Japan, roughly 10%, North America, 50%. And as we get older, I'm sure the number reduces, but it's like, what do you think happens? What's going on there? You ask a kindergartner if they're an artist, and they all raise their hand. You ask somebody who's in their last year of secondary school, and maybe you get a 10% number or something like that. What do you think happens there?
So part of it is just the way that our brain develops as we get older. So as children, we're in what's called the pre-conventional stage. So often you see children there with their painting that's quite abstract, or the words they're using is kind of abstract more. And then what happens is they go to school and they're taught useful conventions. And so you see their artwork, for example, change. They draw more buildings and things. And that's all fine. And then we go to school, we go to college, university, and we're told these are the guideposts, these are the signposts. And that's fine. It's part of becoming conventional in the work we do. But then as adults, we have to kind of go beyond that to becoming that kind of what we call post-conventional. So we're willing to look at all these signposts the way it should be done as useful things, but we're also willing to challenge them. And I think the thing that really, if I look at all the most creative people I've ever had the chance to work with or collaborate with, the one probably thing that links them all is this sense of curiosity. And that can be from some of the world's top scientists, top AI, people from AI backgrounds, or musicians, or top entrepreneurs or business leaders. Having that sense of curiosity is so important. In fact, I just read the other day, Julie Sweet, who's the CEO of Accenture. She was asked, what skills does she hire for now in her leaders? And she said, I look for two things. I look for their leadership skills, their ability to lead and inspire others. But secondly, I look for their curiosity, which is their ability to ask questions. So I think that curiosity piece is increasingly important. And what's often happened is kind of knocked out of us, depending on where you're educated or how you're educated. I think it's changing now, which is great. I'm seeing a lot of great education systems that are now trying to embrace that creativity that we're born with and really develop that. Even places like India, which for many, many years, the problem in the Indian education system is it was just churning out loads of MBAs, loads of
Yeah,
engineers,
very
and they
rote.
realized that there wasn't, they okay, yeah, come up with an idea and develop that idea to create something extraordinary and innovative. And there was a challenge there. So they actually went back to the drawing board and they created a more holistic education system. So I think those are one of the things. But then I think probably the other component of this, why most of the people I deal with, like leaders in organizations, why they don't consider themselves to be creative is they've been told a few myths about what creativity is, and that often holds them back. And one of the biggest myths is something that the media portray all the time, which is the myth of the lone creative genius. The idea of that CEO front cover of the business magazine has kind of single-handedly built that business. But
Whereas
that's
as I've heard you say, the stage on the stage.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So it's just and I think it's a very easy narrative, and I'm a storyteller, so I love telling stories, and it's a very simple story to tell. If you just say, that for example, in the US, like Elon Musk, Tesla. But I mean, Elon didn't create Tesla; it was the two other founders who created Tesla. But that's a more complicated story. Or if you look at the most innovative organizations, you might have some key leaders within that, but it's very much a team effort.
It's interesting you refer to Accenture's leader, and what people are looking for in today's workforce, and creativity is indexing really high. There seems to me, it strikes me that there is a misrepresentation or a disconnect between creative, as if you have to be a poet, a sculptor, or some high level fine artist, as opposed to just being creative. I mean, I studied history, and I feel that I am creative. It's taken me a long time to get there, James, but in my work every day, whether it's solving a problem on a contract, it takes creativity, or talking to my team about something creative on whether it's a social media post or how we want to approach a redesign of a website or a document, or said that's part of marketing or branding, a little bit more traditionally creative.
Mm.
Help me land this plane here. Being the smarter of the two of us here, I feel that, to your point about India, the new MBA is the MFA, the Master of Fine Arts. I
Mm.
feel like, that we're going to see, I don't know why, it's just in my bones, we're going to see a surge in that, because the value and what you've talked about, putting AI is going to take away a lot of the lower level, low hanging fruit tasks, that the value of being creative and not just learning how to paint oils or watercolors or write poetry is really, what's not next, what's now. Is that a little bit of what you're saying here? Strikes
Yeah,
me
I
as.
mean, my general audience when I'm speaking is middle to senior management at the global Fortune 500 companies. That's my audience. So these are not people that are in the arts, so they may have hobbies and things.
Sure.
So when we talk about creativity as it relates to those kind of companies, companies that are in engineering, professional services, financial services, banking, technology, the definition I make of creativity is bringing new ideas to the mind. Innovation is bringing new ideas to the world. But without creativity, there is no innovation. So
Yeah.
creativity is really the engine of innovation. And I was just speaking in Nashville 2 weeks ago for a company called Lex Mundi, who's a global network of global law firms. And if you speak to most of those senior partners in the room, they're not drafting contracts. That's not kind of the day-to-day stuff what they're doing. They're working with their clients and they're strategizing. They're thinking of like creative solutions to things. That's where the value is. I mean, and they're struggling with this because if I'm a client now for a law firm, and I'm going to the law firm and I want them to do some due diligence on a new deal I'm doing, in the past, that firm might charge $100,000 to do that due diligence piece. But now with AI, it's going to charge only $10,000 because the AI can do a lot of it. So it means I think it's more challenging for, in the case of law firms, paralegals, junior associates, But for those people who are skilled at what they're doing, this is a new time. It just requires them to kind of just move a little bit and really focus on how do we develop that the creativity, which is what we call one of the four most important soft skills for this new age. So we have creativity, collaboration, critical thinking, communication skills. So if you read the works of like Yuval Noah Harari or companies like Cisco or Procter and Gamble, they believe these will be the most important skills. And I speak on the creativity and the collaboration piece. That's kind of where I come. And I'm really fascinated. And most of the work I'm doing just now as a speaker is focusing on that creative collaboration, not just with humans and humans working together, but how humans and machines work together, how humans and AI can collaborate in new ways.
I mean, that it occurs to me that that requires a certain awareness, a certain consciousness to be able to be very matter of fact about how you integrate and blend those two together. I know from the work you do, not only from the stage, but the research that you've broken down creativity into four types. And one that's interesting to me, they all are, but this peer creativity, right? Where you go to events, you go to conferences, and that's where that spark is ignited or the flame is turned up or that the opportunity to have that, our audience, I just want to reach out. Thank you for coming back. Thanks for subscribing. Many, not all, are meeting planners and event planners who are incredibly creative, but on the surface, they're dealing with catering, security, hotels, ground transportation, lighting, agendas and everything, but it requires a tremendous amount of creativity. Find that through line for us, for our audience, and you can bring it into the super creativity that you talk about. Where is that through line there?
Well, I think meetings of the past, you could be quite traditional in some ways. There's like a 3-day event, and the first day there was an opening thing, and then there was a keynote speaker on the first day, and the second day there was something there's maybe an awards. But I'm finding now with a lot of events, we're seeing more of a festivalization of events. They want it to be that much more interactive because a lot of what we think of the side rooms at conferences or meetings, that's all staying online. That they don't need to go to Las Vegas or somewhere to go and get a training. That's not the point anymore. So what is the point of events now? I believe the purpose of meeting planners and event planners is to be the curators of conversations. The curators of conversations about building culture in an organization, because I think that is where it lends itself. And actually, it's going back to something very old and very ancient. Like 2,500 years ago, you had something called symposiums. So the word symposium just comes from the Greek word, which means to drink together, because the Greeks weren't stupid. They knew a little bit of alcohol could be quite conducive to the creative process. And so what we're doing is often we're creating these kind of events now, events. Yes, you have all the food and the everything, all the transportation, logistics, but you're also wanting to create this space I sometimes refer to as a third space where you can be together with your peers to debate, discuss, challenge each other's ideas as well. And that's where the great stuff happens. Only 18% of your ideas will ever happen when you're sitting at your desk at work. Most event ideas don't come there. That's why I think events are so powerful, because it gets you out of your usual workspace and puts you into a different kind of place mentally and physically. And I think great meeting and event planners, they understand that. And I think that's where you're seeing a lot more actually creativity come back in to events now as well. And so I actually think it's quite an exciting time because the pandemic just shifted everything up. And now I'm seeing a lot of events happening in the beaches of Cancun rather than in traditional spaces. I see a lot more health and well-being, yoga kind of going on as well.
Yeah.
I love what I'm seeing. I just spoke in just outside Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and I'm seeing this. I also did one in Rome last week, exactly the same kind of thing, where they're also thinking about what is the impact that we want to have for our event to have on that local community. So they're working with like local charities, and there was one I saw, they were building the teamwork exercise that they were doing is building bicycles for those children with disabilities in the area as well. And I just think like all that stuff, it just makes it that kind of creative space.
and whether it's conscious or not, you're there building a bike and it's sparking a whole different, part of your brain, and you're connecting. I love that curating conversations. We are the keynote curators, and I feel that, speech can change the world. It can change a life,
Mm,
and that's a high-minded aspiration. But I really believe that one speech, one life, the world is changed forever. It goes in it's kind of on a different trajectory in the right direction. But curating conversations, it's that provocation in the healthy sense of the word, provoking dialogue, provoking discourse, provoking a challenge in the best way to,
yeah.
have some real new conversations. I love that aspect of it. When you talked about, you have your stages of creativity, the creative process, and we can talk about all of them. There's the preparation, the incubation, the insight, the evaluation, the elaboration. But one that struck me that I'm seeing with meetings and event planners who you and I work with all the time are, they've always been strategic, but it requires a new way, a new approach, a different approach where, the strategy is you're curating conversations, whether it's yoga or sustainability or connecting with the local community. I'm seeing less time on stage, less time in ballrooms, more time out there. But a lot of that strategy happens during what you talk about, the 5 stages, and then
Mm.
talk about the quiet time and how important that is in the preparation before the creative process and then strategies are implemented.
Yeah, so if we take, for example, an event, you're planning a conference or a meeting or an event of some sort, and we have these 5 stages. So the first stage is what we call the preparation stage. So this is when you're doing your site visits and you're making considerations as to who's going to do the catering, and maybe think about the themes of the event, the sub themes of the event. So all that kind of stuff goes on, and really that stage is about just absorbing as much information as possible, like sucking all that information in. And then the mistake that many people make is immediately trying to jump into coming up with the solutions and making things happen. When all the studies show we actually need to have this kind of incubation stage, this middle kind of period, which is just put things to the bottom of the drawer for a few days, a few weeks. Just let your mind go somewhere else. Your brain will continue working on it and thinking through it, and often it will start to find linkages between these things. And maybe there was a sub theme or something you hadn't really kind of thought of before as well. Now, the downside of post pandemic is events are happening in a much shorter time span. It
Sure.
used to be you'd have like a year planning an event or something,
Yeah.
and now it's a few months is nice, and so can be a little bit more challenging. But I still advise people to try and do that and just take a step back if you can, like go into a different environment, physical environment, and go walking. If you're near a beach, like I know like you're near some like beautiful beaches, so just get out of your usual space and just put things to the back of your mind. Your brain will continue sorting and sifting. And there was a great technique I think can also be quite useful for this. They teach at West Point Military Academy in the States, called preloading. And this is basically a technique where what they advise you to do is about 2 hours before you go to sleep at night, get used to asking yourself an open-ended question. What is the one thing I can do to increase the chances of people making great connections at my event? What is the one thing I can do to ensure that people want to book like straight away to come back to the event the following year? And just like about 2 hours before you go to sleep at night, start asking yourself these open-ended questions. And very often what you'll find is by putting that to the back of your mind, you wake up in the morning, next morning, those ideas, they kind of come to you a little bit easier, because basically what's going on there is overnight, in the morning, you're kind of focused, you're unwound. So alpha waves are rippling through your brain, directing your attention inwards to remote associations that emanate from the right hemisphere. Also, the part of the brain that says that's a stupid idea that hasn't woken up yet. So Thomas Edison, I know you're a New Jersey guy from Edison,
I
and
sure am.
Thomas
I'm
Edison once
I'm
said,
near
yeah,
there. Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So he said, never go to sleep without a request to your subconscious. Never go to sleep without a request to your subconscious. So do all that research, but then put things back, let your subconscious do the work, and you'll be kind of intrigued as to maybe new ideas, new ways of seeing things, new ways of solving this. Maybe it's a budgeting problem, for example, or you want this great speaker, but they're just a little bit over your budget range. But maybe if I've got this other sponsor involved, maybe we did this other thing that could open up the possibility. Or maybe there's a different budget I can access as well to get that person in.
I think that preloading is a great idea, and it's doesn't cost anything, just a little
No.
bit of time, and energy. Let's turn the corner here, and we've touched on it a little bit, but look, AI, it's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. You can't turn left, right, walk up or down, enter a building, open up a book, TV. It's everywhere on the internet. Everybody's talking about AI. But you talk about that you touched on it earlier, that collaboration between technology and the human, right? I'd like you to, talk to us about the keys to that kind of partnership, and, maybe how our audience could best implement that.
Yeah, so we're I mean, AI is not a new thing. It's been around since 1956. The same year my father was born. It's not a new technology in that sense. But then we saw machine learning, and then deep learning, and then reinforcement learning, and then things like large language models, ChatGPT, for example. And where we're moving now is into a period of what was called agentic AI. So agentic AI has much higher levels of reasoning. It has much higher levels of autonomy. And what you start using, if you imagine this as an individual, you will have a whole company of AIs working for you and with you, and that you'll be collaborating with, and they'll be doing different tasks and doing different ways of. They think in a slightly different way from you. Every so often, one of them will come back, maybe ask you some follow up questions because it's working on a project. So I think the key that we're going to see now is some companies will do very well in this leap that we're taking, and other companies will be left behind. There's a fascinating stat. I just spoke in Chicago for a software company, and I was explaining to them, like, 80% of companies' AI initiatives get stuck in the pilot phase. So they never move beyond the pilot phase. So they never add value to the organization. They never help reduce costs. They never help increase the top line of an organization. So it's wasted. And if you look at the reason why that is, interestingly, only 20% of it is for technology reasons. That's not the biggest reason. The vast majority of the reason why AI never adds value to an organization, why they don't truly implement it in a transformative way, is because of people and the people part. The playbooks that people are playing in their heads, and it's going to take different forms in different organizations. For some, it's just inertia. And like, I don't feel like I should be doing this. Other people are very worried, so they're almost going to push back because they think it's going to take my job. And so there's different ways of thinking about that. And then other people, they like the idea of being able to use it, but they're just not really sure how to play with it, how to work with it, which areas it will add value to what they do.
Do you
So if we think
think
from
do you think it's a lack of imagination?
sometimes, I mean, sometimes it's just because people, they can't see what it is until they've actually seen maybe a competitor do it, or someone or a colleague using it in this way. And I think what you will find is people will essentially, those that use AI well, they split into two types. One, we term them cyborgs, and the other one, we term them centaurs. So a cyborg is simply that individual who is constantly intertwining everything that they do with AI. They're constantly refining and molding its responses. It's almost like a guitar player has a guitar, it becomes part of them, who they are. Well, a centaur will look at a project or a piece of work and says, okay, these are the things that I'm going to have the AI do, and these are the things I'm going to reserve myself or my human team. Now, whether you decide to be a cyborg or a centaur doesn't really matter. The point is you start to use these tools. And if you're not using AI at least 4 times a day in the work you're doing in a conscious way, you're being left behind, basically. So you have to kind of look at, like, where are you using AI? And I think at this stage, we're kind of starting to move beyond just a pure play, this is interesting, this is fun, to companies I work with, adding like real value, adding real revenue gains to what they're doing, adding real ways to reduce costs, adding real ways to improve the customer experience. And that's exciting. And we'll probably go through the trough of disillusionment about AI. And I think we're almost probably there, if we're not there already, because people like feel AI out. And I get that as well. But that's no bad thing, because really what's going is in the trenches of organizations, they're implementing this stuff and it's providing value, but there's only 20% of them who is adding value. Is really, they're kind of doing it well.
Well, it's interesting because that 20%, it could speak to constraints of the human, that they're coming in with this predisposition where they can't see it. Like you said, they might need a competitor to deploy something, or internally they just, there's whatever it is, the obstacle, the constraint, the self, there's a restriction that they can't get over or get beyond or break through.
Yeah.
But that's where that creativity is kind of unleashed once you kind of work through that.
Yeah, and different companies approach it differently. In the case of Zillow, let's say in the real estate area, they have what they call a blue AI team and a red AI team. So the blue team, what they do is they focus on like Zestimate, I think it's called,
Yes.
where when people upload photos, it recognizes from the photos if it's a nicer kitchen or a nicer garden, and it changes the value of the property based upon that. That's AI that's sitting running behind it. So that's basically a way to just improve the existing product, the essential
Right.
service that they offer. What the red team though focus on is they focus on something that is beyond just the current limitations of the business. Like, how can we really be like go much more than that? So a project I saw them do the other day, which I thought was really interesting, was where they kind of I'm trying to remember name the word you use for it in the US, but the idea that you virtual staging.
Yes.
So you'll have an empty apartment or building, and in the past you'd stage it. So you'd put in nice beds and things and
Some
sofas.
flowers.
Now,
Yeah.
yeah, flowers. Now with the virtual staging option, the red team have developed, you can upload your photos of an empty apartment and say, okay, I want it to be mid-century modern.
Right.
And it will then put in all the virtual furniture for that, and it'll make it look mid-century modern or whatever your style is. And that is something that's going beyond just purely what they've been doing in the past. So there's different ways that companies are doing. There's some like choosing different teams. Some teams are focusing on adding value to the core of the business, and another team will focus on maybe going into new areas and new avenues. Yesterday I was speaking for eBay, and they're doing I think they're going to do some really cool things around the new version of the smart glasses. And maybe it means that next time you go into you've got the Meta smart glasses on for the Ray-Bans, and you go into a store and immediately it's telling me, actually, that product is available on eBay at 30% less for the pre-loved or the secondhand version of that.
Right.
Buy, done.
And they still have they still have the color you want, or
exactly. And it knows what you like. It knows where you are. It's automatically figuring out like where you are in the world. So what the tariffs are, the taxes are, it's done. And so that's kind of just like smoothing that process.
For just any of our listeners and viewers that have had great experiences with AI, whether you're a Cyborg or a Centaur or a little bit of both, throw it in the comment section. In the show notes, we're going to have James's profile in there, all of his speaking information. You can bring him to one of your events. James, you really are one of I say you're not James Tailor, you're James Brown. You're one of the hardest working people in the keynote business. You do have your own podcast. Tell us a little bit about that. What excites you about that?
Yeah, so there's called the Super Creativity Podcast. You can find it on all good podcast platforms, and it probably goes against the idea that every podcast should be very focused, and it's not in that way. I think of it as a podcast for curious people that got, so one week I'll be interviewing the former head of one of the British intelligence services, like the MI6 type or the NSA type organizations, talking about what leaders can learn from those that work in counterintelligence. And then the week after that, I'll be interviewing someone from the meetings industry or the healthcare industry, or someone that's written a book on the power of why we need to be near the ocean, why the color blue has an effect upon our ability to be creative. So it kind of the show is really about creativity, innovation, artificial intelligence. And, but really, I think it's a show for people with curious minds, people that are just kind of interested in kind of thinking more broadly about things.
And to your point, that curiosity is not only what leaders are looking for in the workforce, but it's, according to you, James Taylor, that driving force behind creativity, really being,
Yeah.
having that characteristic in you of being curious. You have a fascinating story. You were in Silicon Valley. You worked with some rock stars. You travel all over the world keynoting. Apart from your podcast and apart from the keynotes, what is it that you're doing that's most kind of got you turned on right now?
So at the moment, I'm focused on writing my first book. I'm doing the second draft of it, actually, on the second draft just now. And so that's kind of requiring a lot. Okay, that's very different, as we know, from speaking. And speaking's I find it quite easier. It feels very natural. Where writing is a slightly different form. Although I'm kind of old school, I write all of my keynotes long form text on my notes on my presentation, because it's the way I can and I can then can like tweak things. So I'm writing every day, but I'm just not writing in the form of a book. And writing in order to deliver something on a stage it's a kind of slightly different form. Although it's interesting, I know you had Seth Godin on the show recently, and I was talking to Seth about it, and he was saying, when you have an idea, his first thing that he thinks to do is to go write a blog post about it, because that's the way that his brain works. His brain works in those kind of 500-word blog posts. The first thing I want to do is to go and have a conversation with someone, speak about it. So we kind of, everyone has I think, preference for how they like to initially express their ideas. And then, so I'm kind of working on on the book just now. And then obviously just doing loads of things around AI for different types of clients. Something I do, which I think I may be the only speaker in the world that possibly does this. I don't know. And I've been doing this for years, is I use artificial intelligence to analyze the audience I'm going to be speaking to in advance of the event. So basically what this tells me is it tells me the psychometric profile of your audience. So it tells me this audience is an audience that values data a little bit more. Maybe it's a room of engineers. So they got everything I say, I have to be able to support it with evidence and data. Or this is a story that's got a big heart, and I'm going to tell more emotional stories. Or this is an audience who is a little bit of a contrarian kind of audience. They're going to push back on things. So I wanted a little bit more time for Q&A as well. So what I do is I basically work with a client. They give me essentially the names or job titles of the people that are coming to the event. I use some tools, AI tools. It gives me the psychometric map. I then create a psychometric map of the presentation or the keynote, the draft keynote. And then I can overlay the psychometrics of the presentation and the psychometrics of your audience, and I can see the gaps. So I can see what needs to be tweaked. And so the emotional response for that is people often after they hear me speak say, I felt like you were talking to me, directly to me. And they had that connection with it, either on an intellectual or an emotional level. But I'm using data to do this as well. So I'm using
really
AI. So this is like human and AI piece.
That's really cool. Do you find that what your preparation, doing those psychometrics, and then what has there ever been? Do you have to check in with the event organizers, the meeting planners, to make sure you're right on track? Sometimes what you get,
yeah.
Yeah.
So that's just one point of things. I mean,
Sure.
I put a huge amount of prep into every keynote.
Of
So what
course.
normally happens is once a client confirms me, like say with your bureau, for example, then there's a document I would send them. I want to know about the audience. I want to know the objectives for their event from a strategic standpoint. I want to understand their brand voice, their culture of the organization. We then jump on a pre-event call. I ask a whole bunch of questions. I then also want to speak to maybe one or two audience members in advance of the event. So that, for me, that helps me get my ear to specific ways that they refer to customers or clients or suppliers, or helps me understand, like, from the trenches, what are the 2 a.m. problems of the people in the organization? How sophisticated the organization when it comes to AI? Because I don't want to be talking over people's heads, but I also don't want to be dumbing things down too much as well.
Yeah.
And then I use the AI stuff and I go and build out the keynote. And in about a week or 2 weeks before the event, I will walk the client through the entire keynote. So it's like getting a handmade suit or a dress made. At that point, the client can say to me, James, we love this story here. Could you refer to, we're going to have a closing that's going to link to that. Or actually, we've decided to have this session here, so maybe we don't need to cover this bit as much. It gives the client confidence that when I step on the stage, they know exactly what's going to be coming out of my mouth, what I'm going to be saying. And it's going to be in alignment with their audience as well. And so that gives a peace of mind for that event planner or that client. Because I basically want whoever books me, whether it's the head of HR or the event planner, whoever it is, I want the most senior person in the organization coming up to that person afterwards and say, great job. That was the best speaker we've ever had. Awesome. Fantastic. I want to make that person a rock star for bringing me in. That's kind of what I'm trying to do.
I think as you list out your preparation, I think that that's a perfect example of that balance, whether it's a Centaur or Cyborg, of using AI, using technology, also incorporating your creative side, the human aspect to it, blending it all together, and then with your final product, it's what is interesting is when those psychometrics come back is what is it that is indexing very high. They value experience, they value safety, they value connection, and then that gives you kind of some guidance to, and then what level of dose you're going to do there is all the other preparation, your pre-event calls, the document that you send out, and the final touches as well. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, the AI doesn't write my keynote for me, but hopefully it does make me a better storyteller, a better communicator, and able to connect with people. Because if I'm just going in the room and I'm just purely entertaining an audience, then it's kind of not the point. I feel the point of a great speaker, kind of going back to what you said earlier, is to create that transformation in the room. That they enter the room and they leave the room with almost like a different person, or with a different perspective on something, or a new insight on something as well. I want to be able to create that transformation.
Well, I mean, for sure. I think we're going to leave it there, James. I don't know if you're headed to the airport. I know you just came back from the airport, but this has been transformational. I know our subscribers and our listeners are going to really get a lot out of this conversation. And I can't thank you enough for, being so generous with your time and your spirit, and plugging into the conversation. Just thank you so much. And for all the keynotes that you have yet to give, where you are going to touch lives and transform audiences and spark their creativity, thank you for doing that. It makes a huge, huge difference in the world.
Thank you, Seth. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
You got it. And to our audience, once again, thanks for coming back. For our first timers, thanks for giving it a shot. We'll see you next time.